Hey everyone, welcome to another Enneagram book review. In case we haven't met before, I'm Heath and I am a Riso Hudson certified Enneagram teacher and the founder of Dearly Beloved Enneagram Training and the author of Becoming Your True You, God, the Enneagram, and Your Unique Purpose. And you can check that out below if you would like to. So the book we're looking at today is The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up by Beatrice, Chestnut, and Uranio, Paes. They are the founders of Chestnut Paes Enneagram Academy. They have a lot of really great information online as well, and Beatrice Chestnut has written several pretty famous books on the Enneagram before this one. So let's take a quick look and see what's on the inside of this book. I just want to say to begin with that I love this book because it's so accessible and it's so practical. The authors obviously are experts at what they're talking about, and the information, of course, they take very seriously because it really can transform your life. But they also aren't super self-serious, and I appreciate that tone. So there's a very brief introduction, which is surprising but also refreshing, and they explain to you what is going on in the book, what you can expect from it, how to use it. And in the introduction, it's also very refreshing that they say you don't have to read the entire book. I've read so many Enneagram books where the authors will say, okay, well, we know that you want to just skip to your type, but please read the entire book. And in this introduction, they're like, you don't have to read the whole thing. So I really liked that as well. Although, honestly, this book, if you read about every type, it's going to give you just such wonderful insight on each one. So I do think that's a good idea. All right, so each chapter is set up in a three-phase system, or three phases of the journey of spiritual development and spiritual transformation. So each type has a path, and it's from their sort of besetting sin, their cardinal sin, their passion, to their virtue, which is, of course, the higher side quality that they embody well in the higher levels of development. So for type 1, for instance, it is the path from anger to serenity. So there's a wonderful little story at the beginning of each type that talks about what it's like to be that type and how they became, how they deal with the world, basically, is the best way to talk about it. And then there's a little checklist in case you're not sure which type you are. And that's a cool thing about this book too, is that it doesn't matter where you are on your Enneagram journey. If you have never picked up another Enneagram book before, or if you're someone like me who's been studying it for 20 or more years, there's something for everybody in this book, and it will meet you wherever you're at. And that is unusual and really cool. So there's a little checklist at the beginning after the story to say, hey, if you're not sure what your type is, here's a checklist of patterns and characteristics. If these resonate with you, then it's likely that you're that type. Then we go on to the first phase of the quest, as it were, and they talk about the different key type patterns, right? So these are things to look for. These are things to focus on and make more conscious, because as you make habits conscious, then you can actually see them in action, and you have the opportunity to choose something else if you're able. All right, so then the authors talk about the passion of each type. They get into more detail about what that's like and how it shows up in each type. Then they move on to using the wings as growth stretches. This is another thing that I find unique to their teaching. I don't know if they originated it or if they learned it from another source, but I can tell you that it's super useful and important information to have. And that's another reason why I think that you should read a lot of Enneagram books, not just ones from your own particular tradition, for instance. I come from the Enneagram Institute. I'm certified through them, and so I've read a lot of Don Richard Riso and Russ Hudson's work. But I also read books from these folks. I read information from the Narrative Enneagram group over here on the West Coast. and others besides, because this is an evolving and growing field of study. So more things are being understood as we go along. And there's some rich tradition that I can benefit from learning more about as I go along as well. Just different people's perspectives and opinions and insights. So I do recommend that you read widely in the Enneagram world. Okay, so this is just cool, this information about using the wings as growth stretches. Then we get into the second stage of the journey where you're facing your shadow. In order to be able to face your shadow, you need to understand what that shadow looks like and what you need to be watching for. So there is a list of things here that help you understand what that shadow looks like. Then you have the blind spots for each type, which is super important to do, right? The habitual patterns that we fall into that we're not even aware of. You need to become aware of them so that they don't master you and rule your life, right? So you're not just a slave to them. Then there's a section on each type's pain, and then the subtypes. So in the Riso Hudson world, we would call this the instinctual variants. Here they're called the subtypes. Same thing. It's the three main instincts: social, sexual, self-preservation, and how each type manifests each of those instincts. Or you could even say how each of those instincts changes or filters the personality type. Okay, so then after you read about a little bit about each one of those subtypes, then you get to learn more about the shadow for each of those subtypes. So it really gets down to a more granular level than a lot of the Enneagram information you're going to find out there, especially for beginners. Okay. Then you learn more about the paradox. And again, that's what we were talking about at the very beginning of each chapter, where you look at the disparity, as it were, between the cardinal sin, the passion, and the virtue, right? There's a paradox there. They're almost opposites, but I would also just call them maybe counterpoints is a better word. So again, for type 1, it is anger versus serenity. Okay. Then, the arrow lines. This is also another cool thing that you don't hear very often. Using the arrow lines for growth. So as you may know, each Enneagram type has a line going from it to another number, and that is considered typically the directions of integration and disintegration. So that's true at the sort of average or lower levels. It's an easy way to talk about those arrows, but there's actually more going on there, and you can actually draw from the positive qualities and characteristics of both of those, not just your integration line, but your disintegration line as well. Again, important information to remember. And then they talk about embracing the high side. Again, this is on that third phase of your journey of transformation. Then they talk about the virtue in more depth and what it looks like to live in that state when you're really embodying that virtue. So for instance, for the one, what it's really like to embody serenity. And then finally, their last little bit is about waking up from the zombie state. And I love that so much, that they're talking about us as as kind of the Walking Dead, right? As zombies going around with these habitual patterns, and we're not really paying attention to what's actually going on in the world, but we're just reacting to everything based on where we are in our level of development in our personality type. So that's just a quick overview of what's in this book. I really recommend it. I'm going to keep this on my shelf my whole life, I think, and refer to it regularly. It's useful for coaches, for teachers, for trainers, just for any individual who wants to understand more about themselves and their loved ones. You can get the down low on people in your life whom you love and you're trying to understand. So I hope this was helpful. If you liked it, please hit the like button below. And if you'd like to subscribe and get more Enneagram book reviews and other videos on the Enneagram and spiritual transformation and personal development, please do that. And until then, we'll see you next time. Blessings on your journey.